Excellencies, honorable guests, speaker, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. Selamat siang. Good afternoon to all of us. And also good morning and good evening for all participants from across the globe who join this seminar virtually. Welcome to the Pecatu Hall for the G20 High-Level Seminar Strengthening Global Collaboration for Tackling Food Insecurity. My name is Dania. I am from the Indonesia Ministry of Finance. I am delighted to serve you as your MC for this event. I hope you are all in very good condition, happy and healthy, and have a wonderful time in Bali. This event hosted by Indonesia as the G20 presidency in collaboration with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The seminar aims to discuss global collaboration and cooperation in order to support food security and ensure food affordability and accessibility and improve availability of data on fertilizers. This event consists of opening remarks, discussion session 1, discussion session 2, and closing remarks. Excellencies, honorable guests, speaker, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. And now, to officially commence this event, I would like to kindly invite Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, Her Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani, to deliver an opening remarks. Your Excellency Ibu Sri Mulyani, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear colleague ministers, governors, heads of international organization, here I see Kristalina and many others. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the high-level seminar on strengthening collaboration for tackling food insecurity. This morning we are all discussing about this one very particular aspect which is threatening many of our people and population. So the issue of food security is becoming one of the most important that creating a totally different and also adding more risk to the global economy. Our seminar today is co-organized between Indonesia G20 presidency and the government of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. My colleague Minister Al-Jadan discussed with me a couple of months ago, so we decided that this is just very important issue, so we tried to arrange this high-level seminar. So before I begin, I would like to convey my appreciation to all of you, distinguished speakers, who are joining today in this seminar, both in person as well as virtually. We also would like to extend our thanks to all participants in this seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are witnessing an alarming increase in global hunger. The war in Ukraine and worsening export restriction exacerbate the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, which result in supply-demand mismatch and supply disruption, which driven food prices to record level. World food prices jumped nearly 13% in March. This is also reaching to a new high and will likely rise even further, potentially up to 20% toward the end of 2022. The challenges to the global economy are likely to persist, keeping food prices high for the foreseeable future. Our situation here in 2022 is going to be projected to be deteriorated further. And this is not good news for all of us. The unresolved COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the unfolding war in Ukraine, are likely to exacerbate the already severe 2022 acute food insecurity that we are all already seeing. In addition to that, a looming fertilizer crisis also has the potential to further exacerbate and extend food crisis even into 2023 and beyond. There is an urgency with which the food crisis should be addressed. The deployment of all available financing mechanisms is immediately needed to save lives and strengthen financial as well as social stability. This is particularly true and urgent for many low-income countries and developing countries. Moreover, we also see that we need to continue still, although very hard, maintain good macroeconomic policy, which is also becoming now threatened by the crisis. In the G20, discussing about food security and food crisis is not new. Actually, during the Korean G20 presidency in 2010, followed by the French G20 presidency in 2011, the G20 recognized the importance of agriculture for growth, poverty reduction, and food, as well as nutrition security, and reiterated the need for long-term investment in the agriculture sector in developing countries, keeping in mind the impact of volatility on food insecurity, food security and food insecurity. So during our discussion under the Indonesia G20 presidency, members have identified the urgent need for the G20 to take concrete steps in collaboration with international organizations to address food security, especially to help countries in need. Indonesia, as the G20 presidency, is urgently calling for concrete action to tackle growing food insecurity and related challenges. We also seen the other international organizations making new commitment to address this issue. I hear and I receive Kristalina as well as the bank issuing a joint position related to this food security problem. We also see the United Nations through Global Crisis Response Group on Food, Energy and Finance has provided specific policy recommendations aimed at ensuring that sufficient supply of food are available to all countries in need, enabling all vulnerable people to access the food that they need and enabling people everywhere to access humanitarian food assistance when necessary. The World Bank Group announced a comprehensive response to food and nutrition security of $30 billion and will support targeted supply as well as demand-side intervention to increase food supply and protect the most vulnerable from high food prices. I know IMF is also doing, especially for the country under the program. The WTO had also adopted ministerial declaration on the emergency responses to food insecurity. Members pledge their strong commitment to take steps to facilitate trade. Taking immediate action to prevent this issue from worsening is also aligned with our mandate of the 2030 Sustainable Agenda. The goal number 2 of the SDG is seek sustainable solution to end hunger in all its forms by 2030 and also to achieve food security. We are also seeing many countries acting nationally. Indonesia government has implemented policy to maintain the country food security by increasing existing production capacity and food diversification, strengthening our buffer stock and logistical system, and modernizing our agriculture system. The government also developed large-scale farming, the food estate, sustainable closed-loop food farming with integrated processing and logistics system to increase food production and productivity. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, given the urgent current situation, we must ensure there is a system of collaboration and cooperation to address growing food insecurity and related issues. The global collaboration should ensure food affordability for all, support the open, transparent, predictable, and non-discriminatory multilateral trading condition consistent with the WTO rules, also enhancing transparency in the food value chain. The Indonesia G20 presidency, in collaboration with Saudi Arabia and supported by some G20 members, as well as international organizations, is proposing a call for global action to address growing food insecurity. The G20 could urgently convene a joint G20 finance and agriculture ministers meeting to improve coordination between finance and agriculture ministries and explore action to address the growing food insecurity and related issue. This is exactly like what we did or what we are doing with joint finance and health ministers when we are dealing with the COVID and preparing pandemic preparedness mechanism. We need to continue using our instrument and policy tool, including policy mix of fiscal and sectoral policy that explore how we are going to be able to address the food insecurity situation. The G20 is successfully doing this for the finance and health, in which this morning we are seeing more and more countries supporting our financing intermediary facility that is established to support the pandemic preparedness globally. We do hope the same thing can be also established by strengthening our ability to mobilize not only financing, but most importantly, policy coordination across countries and supported by international organizations. In closing, it is very important and imperative that the international community and relevant multilateral fora working together to end the crisis that we are facing, especially on the food, energy, and potentially will have a spillover to the financial side. The G20 could take a leading role by developing concrete action. With the spirit of cooperation, collaboration, and multilateralism, I'm sure we are going to be able to find a way and to address this issue effectively. Together, we can make the world better, and we still continue have the hope and optimism that the world could recover together, recover stronger. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, for your opening remarks. Excellencies, honorable guests, speakers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, now we proceed to the next opening remark. I would like to kindly invite the Minister of Finance of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Excellency Mohammed Al-Jad'an, to deliver an opening remark. Your Excellency, you may have the floor.
Good afternoon. And I promise I did not copy a lot of what she wrote, so I only copied part of it. So please forgive the repeated sentences that I copied from Her Excellency. Good afternoon, Excellencies, honorable guests, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin by thanking the Indonesian G20 presidency for organizing this important event, which Saudi Arabia is honored to co-host. I would also like to thank Her Excellency Sri Mulyani and her team for their outstanding efforts in leading the G20 through these extremely challenging times. The world is witnessing an alarming developments in the food security as multiple crises reinforcing each other have driven food prices to record levels, affecting developing countries the hardest given their import dependencies. Recent data reveals a gloomy picture, unfortunately. According to the FAO, around 2.3 billion people, almost 30% of the world population, moderately or severely food insecure. Among them, almost 925 million, or 11.7% of the global population, are severely food insecure. Compare that to only 564 million in 2014. The situation in the MENA region is just as alarming, if not even more. Its share of the world's acutely food insecure people is 20%, although it accounts only for 6% of the world's population. In addition, a looming fertilizers crisis threatens to even make that worse and extend the food security crisis, as Sri Mulyani said, beyond even 23. This is evident in the IMF price index for fertilizers, which in April 22 jumped almost 120% year on year. It is worrisome that fertilizers are now at their least affordable level since 2008. Globally, the current trend reflects a significant setback to our efforts to achieve SDG 2 by 2030. Given the developments we are currently witnessing, I fear that without an effective countermeasure, food insecurity will continue to rise, putting even more people at risk. In this situation, the G20 simply cannot remain a silent spectator. It must act, and it must act urgently and decisively. So, the question is, what can the G20 do in terms of concrete actions, and what can we learn from past successes and failures? Drawing upon expertise of specialized institutions like the FAO, the IFAD, the WTO, the World Bank, the IMF, we can deepen our understanding of the depth and breadth of the food insecurity issue, explore solutions, chart out plans of concrete actions, and define implementation and responsibilities. With this in mind, allow me to put forward a few specific ideas on the table. First, we should articulate our support for open, transparent, predictable, and multilateral trading system consistent with the WTO rules. According to the World Bank, as of June 22, there are 310 active trade measures in 86 countries that are affecting food and fertilizers. Looking back at the food prices crisis in 2007 and 2008, export restriction contributed to about 40% of the increase in agriculture prices. Therefore, the G20 should revisit and review trade restrictive measures, including those on food-related exports, with the aim of enhancing market predictability, increasing business confidence, and allowing agri-food trade to flourish. Second, we should enhance transparency in the food value chain by supporting data availability. Indeed, we should strengthen the regional and country data and information to better inform decisions and enhance research and analysis, which will help us better understand the dynamics of the food security issue. Third, a key issue that is currently largely overlooked is the issue of fertilizers, which are vital for the agriculture sector and food production. If high fertilizer prices persist, they could extend this crisis to other food products, such as rice, which is a staple food for billions around the world. Therefore, we should establish a mechanism to support and facilitate affordable supplies of fertilizers to farmers. The aim is to support supply-demand dynamics and promote free market efficiencies. We should enhance and promote the connections between fertilizer producers and consumers, mainly through helping to facilitate the distribution of surpluses from places where they exist to places where they are in short. Fourth, according to the latest international organization's estimates, approximately 14% of the world food is lost annually between harvest and retail. That is not the end, unfortunately. 17%, in addition to the 14%, is wasted at the retail and customer levels. Reducing food waste and loss can thus go a long way to address food insecurity without having to deal with challenges involving the ramping up of food production, while also contributing to alleviating environmental pollution. Saudi Arabia's international efforts, including the Arab Coordination Group commitment of $10 billion, have provided immediate relief and long-term support to countries in most need. Such efforts should be further elevated and coordinated through the G20, and I call on countries who are with us today and on the international organizations to unite their efforts to address the growing food security challenges. The experience with COVID-19, the worst health crisis in the history of mankind, has demonstrated that global cooperation and collaboration are key to success in fighting global crises. We must again stand together and united in tackling the issue of food insecurity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellencies, for your remarks. Excellencies, honorable guests, speaker, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Now we proceed to the main agenda, that is the discussion. The discussion in this seminar will be divided into two sessions. The first topic for our discussion is ensuring food security and ending hunger. For session 1, I would like to introduce Ibu Kania Sutisna Winata as the moderator of this session. Kania Sutisna Winata is a prominent Indonesia journalist. She is leading Indonesian TV journalist and news anchor in Indonesia. She has conducted many programs in some prominent TV channels, including economic and business news program. Without further ado, please welcome our moderator, Ibu Kania Sutisnawinata.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Hello, good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, panelists, ladies and gentlemen joining us here and also through our digital channel. Welcome again to our high-level seminar on strengthening global collaboration for tackling food insecurity. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Kania Sutisnawinata and I am from Indonesia, and it is my honor to conduct this first session ensuring food security and ending hunger. Ladies and gentlemen, ensuring food security is indeed high on the agenda as we tackle problems pertaining to food insecurity and already exacerbated by impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic itself. As a result, as was mentioned earlier as well, food prices all over the world as we know it are increasing to record levels. And if this issue persists, could turn millions more into a state of food insecurity, more so in developing countries, as the cost of global food imports is estimated to increase further by the billions post-pandemic, which could potentially develop into a global hunger catastrophe. So in this session, ensuring food security and ending hunger, we hope, of course, to gather in the spirit of data sharing, of course, and accessibility of data, as was also mentioned earlier, a portrait on the current situation from our distinguished panelists joining us here and also via our online channel. So allow me to introduce our distinguished panel for this first session. His Excellency Bapak Airlangga Hartarto, Coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs, Indonesia. Her Excellency Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, United States. His Excellency Amadou Hott, Minister of Economy, Planning and International Cooperation, Senegal, the country that is also assuming the chair of the African Union. Her Excellency Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Director General, World Trade Organization. His Excellency Chu Dong-hyu, Director General, Food and Agriculture of Organization. So without further ado, let's welcome our panelists to the stage and also to the screen. Hello and welcome. Hello, welcome Your Excellencies. Such a pleasure to have you with us here present in Bali and also joining through our online channel. It is indeed an honor to have all of you in this session. We have a very short and brief discussion ahead as we try to hear the perspectives from each of our distinguished panelists on the alarming risk to global food security, and as we try to address food security in the short term and also design a more long-term sustainable transformation of agriculture and also food system. So I'd like to have one question to be answered by each of our panelists, of course to be answered from their respective background. What has been done to prevent the impending food crisis on a national level, and what can be expected from a collaboration on a global level? And last but not least, in the short term, how to make sure that the system can help the people who need it the most. So let's have a 5 minutes perspective from each of our distinguished panelists. And I would like to start with the Coordinating Minister Hartarto, who's joining us online. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Relatively secure, but also Indonesia experienced deficit on soybean, sugar, wheat and meat. Therefore, Indonesia need a reliable trading system which conducted by WTO So the free flow of goods as well as supply chain for food production is available. And regarding the availability and the prices of the fertilizer, Indonesia is quite happy. Indonesia is at the moment we have enough capacity of production of fertilizer, in which we also export around 2 million tons of urea fertilizer, and we still also importing some material like phosphate as well as potassium. Indonesia proposed that in fact the food security as our main priorities, and we need to start from ourselves. Based on our experience, we need to do something within our control and can be done immediately. For instance, first, we need to reduce our food loss and waste. Globally, 17% of food production, or 931 million of ton food waste in 2019. Indonesia disposed 20 to 48 million tons of food waste in 2000 to 2019, which is actually the same portion for food for 61 or 121 million of people every year. Small initiatives such reducing the size of plate, changing from buffet to a la carte menu, I think this wisely could lead to significant impact. The second is the development of the local food diversification, including the policy strategies related to optimizing the land use potential for local dietary and developing local food processing industry. Indonesia developed locally grown foods such as sagu, sorghum, as well as cassava and local fruit. The third is to build food security in the long term, in which we need a comprehensive strengthening our whole stream of agriculture production from upstream to downstream. On the upstream, they have developed the policy to protect the paddy field in 8 provinces of 3.8 million hectares that will continue for every province. At the downstream, the government has ensured consumer to access safe and quality food through strengthening national food reserve, especially in the farm level, development infrastructure, and food logistics. And the whole stream, Indonesia developed corporate farming, closed loop, food estate, and other downstream, upstream integrated system involving all the stakeholders. On the other hand, also we need to accelerate and strengthen the global collaboration to address the food security problem. And Indonesia believes that each country, including Indonesia, need to provide and prepare minimum reserve food security. So not only for one country, for Indonesia, but as well as we collaborate every nation's reserve food supply, so we can exchange when the time and when the need is critical for other countries. And in short, we need commitment and from G20 countries to work hand in hand to strengthen the collaboration for tackling this food global challenge. Thank you.
Very well, thank you for that perspective, Coordinating Mr. Hartarto. Next, we would like to move on to Secretary Yellen, who's also with us here in Bali. Welcome, Your Excellency. Thank you again for joining us here. So the same question to you. How critical is it to address these issues pertaining food insecurity appropriately, and what do you think is the short and the long-term perspective?
Well, thanks so much for that question, and let me thank the Indonesian presidency for convening this seminar. We're meeting in an extremely difficult time for global food security was already under pressure from conflict, climate change, and economic shocks associated with COVID-19. And now, Russia's war against Ukraine has exacerbated those challenges and led to a global crisis of food insecurity as prices spiked for food, fertilizer, and fuel. Putin's actions, including the destruction of agricultural facilities, theft of grain and farm equipment, and the effective blockade of Black Sea ports, amounts to using food as a weapon of war. Those most directly impacted are the poorest households in the poorest countries. Families that already spend a disproportionate share of their income on food are forced to make stark choices. Low-income countries that already face severe fiscal constraints are struggling to import enough food and fertilizer and to provide even the most basic social safety net to their people. And these effects are setting back development and undermining efforts to eradicate poverty. We must take action to address the short-term food insecurity crisis and, equally important, the longer-term drivers of food insecurity, including the nexus with climate change. The speed and wisdom of our decisions now will make the difference on whether we get the crisis under control. The G20 must work together to tackle these challenges and protect vulnerable families from the threat of hunger today and tomorrow. So let me suggest 3 lines of effort. First, we G20 countries must set the example and call on others to avoid counterproductive policy responses, such as export restrictions and stockpiling, which distort markets and further drive up prices. Equally, governments should tailor fiscal responses to those most in need, leveraging digital tools where possible to carefully target support for vulnerable households rather than employing blanket subsidies that are regressive and costly. Second, we must leverage the existing food security and agricultural architecture to the maximum. The multilateral development banks, the Rome-based food agencies, including IFAD, the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, or GAFSP, the IMF, and the WTO all have roles to play. For example, I met with the heads of the international financial institutions on this important issue, and they responded in May with the IFI action plan to address food insecurity. We must continue to encourage these institutions to step up and surge their response to the crisis with urgency and to implement the commitments outlined in the action plan. I was also pleased with the strong outcomes at on food security at the WTO's 12th Ministerial Conference. Thank you, Ngozi. We don't need new institutions. What we need is robust coordination, knowledge sharing, research and development, financing, and action. In this respect, the Global Alliance for Food Security is helpful. And I further propose that G20 deputies consider how to enhance cooperation between G20 finance ministries and the relevant other authorities, including by improving data transparency. Third, G20 countries must take steps to provide financial assistance. For our part, the U.S. announced last month that we're committing a further $2.76 billion to tackling food insecurity on top of $2.8 billion already provided since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and we're providing $500 million for the EBRD's Resilience and Livelihood Framework to support food and energy security, and $155 million to GAFSP. We will also be contributing to the African Development Bank's African Emergency Food Production Facility and IFAD's Crisis Response Initiative. Much more work remains to eliminate hunger and poverty beyond responding to the current crisis, and I look forward to continuing our engagement with partners in the G20, international financial institutions, and other international organizations. Thanks.
Thank you, Secretary Yellen. And moving on to Minister Hart, who's also here with us today. Again, welcome, Your Excellency. Perhaps the same question, but maybe I can just add up a couple of data statistics on that. The World Bank president has recently stated that food insecurity is rising fastest in middle-income countries, and a UN report stated the global number of undernourished people could increase by 8 to 13 million people in 2023. So the most pronounced increases taking place is in Asia-Pacific, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa and the Near East and North Africa. So tell us more what has been done to prevent this impending food crisis, food hunger, as well as what is expected out of this global cooperation, and what can we do to ensure that the people that need it the most is going to get the help?
Thank you very much. Even before the Ukrainian crisis, the FAO said that basically 230 million people out of the 1/3 of the world population that are kind of suffering from malnourishment comes from Africa, about 230 million. After the crisis, after the Ukrainian war, or with the Ukrainian war, in Africa is 310 million people now. This is according to the World Food Program. According to the African Development Bank, because of the issues of accessing fertilizer, Africa has a shortfall of about 2 million metric tons of fertilizer this year. This translates into about $11 billion of lost production this year alone, which means less revenue for the 33 million smallholder farmers in Africa. This means then the governments have to spend more to support the populations, which means budget deficit increases at a time of interest rates are increasing. This required more budget support from the MDBs and from other bilateral partners towards Africa. And we appreciate the US support to the African Development Bank facility on emergency food plans, and Senegal was among the first countries to benefit, about 120 million euros approved 2 weeks ago. It's a good initiative, but it's not enough. We need more from our partners. 3 things we would suggest. Number one, from an African point of view, we need to take food security as an even higher priority. We can no longer rely on importing foods and fertilizer while we have 60% of the world uncultivated arable land. This is number one. Number two, we have enough gas and enough potassium to have the fertilizer we need for our agriculture and even to export. Number three, we have phosphates, and Senegal, for example, is exporting phosphates. And other countries like Morocco are exporting phosphate, and we need to use that more in Africa to generate actually more food production. But if you have all of that and you don't have the infrastructure that goes with it, the technology transfers that goes with it, it will be difficult to have the impact. From a global point of view, all the initiatives that are being mentioned are very good, but we need to coordinate, to work more together, and to have an even greater sense of urgency whenever our lives is threatened, like during the COVID times. The world came together and made extraordinary decisions in the shortest period of time all the partners change their procedures and policies to really meet the challenge. Like the IMF, the World Bank, the FDB, everybody changed their policies to help the countries. This time, it is the same. If we don't react fast, we'll have more casualties than during COVID times. And so the world must react more swiftly so that we can have the investment that are required. And lastly, we understand that food and fertilizer are exempt from sanctions. However, the participant, the market participant, whether it's the traders or the banks or the insurers, are reluctant to participate if the products are coming from certain locations because they're afraid to be sanctioned in the future. Is it possible to come out very clearly and say, whenever you're buying fertilizer, food from Russia or from Ukraine or from wherever around the world, there will be no sanction today, no sanction tomorrow, whether you're a trader, whether you're a bank, whether you're an insurer, so that we can stabilize the market. Because some people can circumvent the sanctions and buy the product at a big discount, and we in Africa, we are not responsible for climate change we are suffering. We are not responsible for this crisis, this war we are suffering, and we think that it is about time really to come out very clear and say Africa or anybody you can buy from anywhere, nobody will be sanctioned on food and on fertilizer very clearly. Today or tomorrow, no sanctions on that. Thank you very much.
Very well, thank you for that, Mr. Hart. We would like to go, yes, a big round of applause, please. Go ahead. Those are very powerful messages that we've been hearing so far. So let's move on to our online channel to greet Director General Konjo Iweala, who's also joining us in this session. Hello, Your Excellency. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us. What is your perspective on our topic? The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And let me start by congratulating Indonesia's G20 presidency and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for organizing this seminar. It could not be more timely. International trade is critical for food security and nutrition, and I'm happy to hear so many refer to trade. Trade in food and farm goods has increased steadily in the last 20 years, and 1 in 5 calories consumed worldwide is traded across borders. Key staples like cereals and oils are heavily traded. Inputs like fertilizer, seeds, animal feed, and pesticides are traded even more than food. Yesterday, with congratulations to the Secretary General, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and my sister, Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, who is with us, we all got a bit of good news that the Black Sea situation may be nearing a solution. We certainly hope so, since we are all worried about the picture for food insecurity. The global food system is being buffeted by multiple shocks: the pandemic, climate change, high energy prices, and a war that has disrupted the ability of food and fertilizer from a key supplying region, Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus, to reach international markets. Food prices are rising faster than household incomes, particularly in many developing countries. The World Food Programme estimates that some 200 million more people are acutely food insecure or at high risk than before the COVID pandemic. Amid intense competition for food and key inputs like fertilizer, there is a risk that supplies may be diverted away from poorer countries to richer ones, repeating the experience with COVID-19 vaccines. For instance, African countries are already having difficulty assessing adequate quantities of fertilizer. The recent opening of Africa's largest fertilizer production plant in Nigeria is a welcome step forward. It has the potential to help boost farm yields across the continent, though for now, reports suggest it may be contracted to sell mostly to other regions. We have just heard Minister Hart talk of a 2 million metric ton fertilizer shortage on the continent. At the WTO, we are determined to be part of the solution to these problems. Cooperation on trade will be vital to mitigate and minimize the negative impacts of the crisis on our food systems. That's why I'm happy to report that at our 12th ministerial conference in June, WTO members took some important steps in the right direction with the help of every government represented here, for which I thank you all. And special thanks to Janet for your support. WTO members agreed to exempt from export restrictions food bought by the World Food Programme for humanitarian purposes. WFP Chief David Beasley says the legally binding decision we took will save the agency time and money when procuring food for millions of vulnerable people. Ministers also adopted a declaration pledging to facilitate trade in food, fertilizer, and other agricultural inputs. They stressed the importance of not imposing export restrictions and encouraged members with surplus stocks to release them on international markets. If the 25 million tons of grain from Ukraine is released, this will, of course, make a huge difference. Importantly, WTO members vowed to cooperate on enhancing productivity. Insufficient investment in research and development and extension services have made low yields in many poor countries where soil and water conditions are otherwise favorable, again, as Minister Hott mentioned, for Africa. Market transparency is a critical tool for mitigating food price volatility. That is why the G20 set up the Agricultural Market Information System in 2011, in which the WTO continues to participate actively and which yields valuable information. It is why the WTO has also been closely monitoring trade measures affecting food since the war in Ukraine started in February, along with job-owning members about keeping international markets open for food and agricultural inputs. Our monitoring shows that 29 countries have introduced 52 measures prohibiting or restricting exports of food, feed, and fertilizer. Now, around 13 of these measures have since been phased out, including Indonesia's export ban on palm oil, for which I congratulate them. These are positive developments, but 23 countries have roughly 39 measures still in place. While still too many, it compares favorably with the 119 measures we saw for medical products during the height of the pandemic. Now, I want to clarify that our figures differ a bit from those published by other monitoring exercises because of different methodologies for counting measures and modifications to measures. Looking ahead, a fair and market-oriented agricultural trading system will help incentivize investments in production needed to ensure long-term food security in all WTO members. To this end, I ask your governments to build on the momentum from MC12 and revitalize agricultural negotiations so that at the WTO we can maximize.
Your Excellency. Oh, okay, I think we're having a connection problem. Yes, I think we'll try to fix that problem, and if we can get Her Excellency back to finish her statement perspective. But in the meantime, we are going to listen in to Director General Dongju, who's also has a message, a perspective that he would like to share in this session. So let's listen in.
Excellencies, I'm pleased to address this G20 high-level seminar on strengthening global collaboration for tackling food insecurity. Both the Russia Federation and Ukraine are main producers and net exporters of agricultural commodities and play leading roles in supplying global markets with foodstuffs and fertilizers. Both countries are among the top 10 exporters of wheat, maize, and sunflower oil. In particular, for sunflower oil, they are the top 2 exporters in the world, accounting for over 70% of the global export. Already prior to this war, international food commodity prices were high. If a food price index reached an all-time high in March 2022, averaging 159.7 points in nominal terms, and 34% up from a year before. Since the beginning of 2020, the vegetable oil price index more than doubled, while those of the cereals increased by more than 60%, and sugar more than 50%. Energy prices increased significantly since mid-2020, and as a consequence, world price of the fertilizer have almost risen. In addition, Russia Federation is also a key player in the global fertilizer market. While the food prices are high, the prices of agricultural input, including feed, fertilizers, pesticides, and fuels, have also risen and are squeezing farmers' incomes. Causing big jobs in the incomes, reducing farmers' incentives, and putting future harvest at risk. This places a double burden upon the global agricultural systems, poor farmers, and lack of food availability. In 2021, up to 828 million people suffered chronic hunger. Severe food insecurity increased in every region of the world in 2021. Outbreak of the war in Ukraine has compounded the situation, particularly for the poor and the most vulnerable. Our simulations indicate that the global number of the undernourished in 2022 would increase by 7.6 million people due to the effects of the conflict. And this could be as high as an additional 19 million people in 2023. To help the most affected countries deal with the rising import costs, FAO has proposed, first, to invest in countries most in need that are severely affected by the increase in food prices and vulnerabilities. Second, to support the most affected countries deal with the rising import costs through the establishment of the Global Food Import Financing Facilities, FIFF. Third, to put the policies in place that both increase productivity and protect natural resources and are specific to their regional needs. Finally, we needed to ensure better and more efficient use of available outputs and inputs. We need to produce more with less, reduce food loss and waste substantially. First, market transparency and promoting informed decisions. Ensure that the market and trade contributed to the food security during the period of the crisis, and avoid export restrictions or other trade distorting measures. We must continue to work together in an efficient, effective, and coherent manner to accelerate the transformation of our agriculture to be more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and more sustainable for better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life for all, leaving no one behind. In closing, I reaffirm FAO's commitment to work with all the partners to overcome the challenges. I thank you.
Very well, thank you so much for that perspective. And I see that the Director General Okonjo Iweala is back online with us. Would you like to conclude your statement?
Thank you very much. It's not exactly clear to me where we left off, but I thought you were following till maybe the very last point. So let me repeat that. I was talking about the fact that our monitoring shows that 29 countries have introduced 52 measures prohibiting or restricting exports of food, feed, and fertilizer. I don't know if you heard that part.
That's correct. That's correct.
You did?
Yes.
Okay. So go down then. Down? Perhaps it's the last paragraph. I was saying that looking ahead,
okay,
a fair and market-oriented agricultural trading system should help incentivize investments in production needed to ensure long-term food security in all WTO members. And to this end, I ask your governments to build on the momentum from the 12th ministerial meeting to help us revitalize agriculture negotiations at the WTO so we can maximize trade's contribution to building the food systems we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Your Excellency. I think that's all the time that we have right now. I'm very sorry. This is going to be a very brief discussion, and I'm sure we've listened to all the perspective from our distinguished panelists. There is clearly an urgent need to work together to collaborate further for a stronger and robust coordination in terms of policy to build a more sustainable way forward, and also to address food and security challenges in the near short term. With this, I'd like to wrap up this discussion. Thank you again for our distinguished speakers in this session. A round of applause for His Excellency Bapak Airlangga Hartarto, Coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs, Indonesia. Her Excellency Janet Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury, United States. His Excellency Amadou Houde, Minister of Economy, Planning and International Cooperation, Senegal, as well as Chair of the African Union, and also Her Excellency Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Director General, World Trade Organization. Last but not least, His Excellency Kudongju, Director General, Food and Agriculture Organization. Thank you again, Your Excellencies, for joining us. And as well, thank you to all distinguished participants, guests, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Stay safe and healthy. I'm Kania Sutisnawinata, and I'll hand back to the MC.
Thank you to all honorable panelists and moderator. What a fruitful discussion we have on session 1. Focus on supporting food security and ensuring food affordability and accessibility, and improving availability of data on fertilizers, which will help the world end hunger. Excellencies, honorable guests, speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, following the next agenda, we are moving to session 2, Global Collaboration, the Way Forward. On the second topic, we expect to have views and proposals on how global collaboration could be established to address the food insecurity and its related issues. I would like to introduce Ibu Valerina Daniel as the moderator for this session 2. Valerina Daniel is a prominent journalist, an environment ambassador in Indonesia, and a former advisor to the Indonesian Minister of Tourism for Sustainable Tourism Development. She is currently also helping the Australia-Indonesia Center to focus on communication and women's leadership. She is Miss Indonesia and ASEAN 2005. And without further ado, please welcome our moderator, Ibu Valerina Daniel.
Thank you, MC, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our second session on high-level seminar on strengthening global collaboration for tackling food insecurity. My name is Valerina Daniel, and it is my honor to be your moderator today. Now we are going to talk about global collaboration and the way forward. As you already know, food security has been one of the main agendas globally. All countries and international organizations have committed to launch programs in addressing this issue. However, it is our belief that in order to achieve the best result, we need to collaborate and cooperate with all parties. Just like the theme of the G20 Indonesia presidency this year, recover together, recover stronger. Thus, in this session, we are going to focus more on what can we do to ensure the collaboration for supporting food security through financial support and technical assistance, and sharing information and knowledge from countries and international institutions. Also, ensuring affordability and accessibility for all on food and fertilizers. So to discuss these issues, we are pleased to be joined by prominent speakers. The first speaker is Her Excellency Amina J. Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of United Nations, who will be joining us virtually live from New York. Second, Her Excellency Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of International Monetary Fund. Third is His Excellency Marco Aurelio dos Santos Roja, Secretary for International Economic Affairs from Ministry of Economic of Brazil. Fourth is His Excellency Axel van Trotsenberg, Managing Director of Operations from the World Bank Group. And finally, His Excellency Dominic Ziller, Vice President of International Fund for Agriculture Development, who will be joining us virtually as well. So once again, please welcome our speakers to the stage and to the screen. Excellencies, thank you very much for joining us today. So ladies and gentlemen, before we start, I would like to inform the speakers that all of you each will have 5 minutes to speak. So we would appreciate that all speakers could follow this time arrangement. So for the first speaking opportunity, I would like to invite Her Excellency Amina J. Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of United Nations, to deliver your views on developing global collaboration to address growing food insecurity. So Your Excellencies, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Excellencies and friends. Assalamu alaikum. I'd like to join my appreciation to the presidency of the G20 Indonesia and to the able leadership of Sri Mulyani, but also to our co-hosts from Saudi Arabia and our finance ministers and central bank governors who are really putting a focus on the food insecurity crisis. The context is key, and we heard in the first session, and most elaborated by Minister Hott of Senegal, how important it is to have that in mind when we are taking the actions and the solutions that we need with a sense of urgency and scale. The crisis, climate change, to the pandemic recovery, rising inflation, and of course now all exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. The proactive decision of the Secretary General to put the Global Crisis Response Group on food, energy and finance is a signal of that collaboration and solidarity that is needed in finding the solutions to what we are facing at scale and with a sense of urgency. That, I think, is important for all. The past year, we've heard about the global food prices that have risen sharply and the statistics that have been provided, appalling statistics by His Excellency Mohammed Al-Shadan. We also know that the social and economic impact of this unprecedented global wave of destitution is not going to leave anyone untouched or unscathed by this. It's becoming a major challenge for middle-income countries, and we shouldn't forget that the majority of the poor and those with the highest inequalities do live in these countries. Ending hunger is within our reach, and we have heard over and over again that we do have the resources, enough food in our world for everyone if we try to collaborate and act together. But we need a unified approach, a coordinated approach, coherence in what we commit to and how we respond. I would say that we need, for immediate action, 3 areas. First, that we must urgently reduce the pressure on markets by increasing the supplies of and access to affordable food and fertilizers. And there should be no restrictions on export. Ngozi has given us a whole lot of asks there that we need to pay attention to, and we must see surpluses made available to those most in need, investing, of course, in sustainable storage systems around our developing countries. We have seen some encouraging developments this week with the efforts to reintegrate Ukraine's food production, and we're working hard to say, as well as the food and fertilizer produced by Russia into world markets. Second, the social protection systems needed to cover everyone in need, with the right combination of food, cash and support for water, sanitation, nutrition and livelihoods. This is urgent. All these play a huge part of the food security. We welcome the initiatives so far that have been put at the table, and we look forward to seeing the scale again and the urgency at which the response allows these initiatives to be deployed. Third, finance is essential, the means of implementation. There is no answer to the food crisis without an answer to the global financial crisis that is squeezing developing countries dry. All countries must have access to the liquidity they need to support people and invest in the recovery. And no government should have to choose between servicing its debt and servicing its people. International financial institutions will need to step up with the additional investments. And I say here the additional investments needed to prevent a global debt crisis. One viable solution could be the issuance of new special drawing rights by the IMF. There is no better option. The scale and speed needed, that will not increase debt. And Kristalina has worked 24/7 for the first set, and I believe working on getting the SDRs that have come into our new financing instruments released is a priority. It's a time to turn the crisis into an opportunity to accelerate the transformation of food systems and the shift to renewable energy. We are counting on the G20 leadership to get us back on track to achieve some of the food systems transformations we speak about towards sustainable development goals. The means are available. We are hearing this today in this venue, but what we really need, the political will that we hear, needs to be turned into immediate action, and this is a moral imperative. Burning planet, millions who are going hungry, remind us that time is of essence. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Amina Mohammed, for your insightful remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate that Her Excellency Amina herself can join us directly from New York. However, she can only join us for a short time because she needs to continue with her next agenda. So thank you once again, Your Excellency, for your precious time from New York. Please give her applause, ladies and gentlemen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, next I would like to invite Her Excellency Kristalina Georgieva to deliver your thoughts on what can the international financial institutions do to support the accessibility and affordability on food and fertilizers for all.
Thank you very much to our two ministers that brought us together. We are talking about the world's most pressing solvable problem. We use this very nice technical term, food insecurity, but actually what we're talking about is hunger. A problem that must not exist in a world that is capable of feeding all its people. And this problem has become only worse under the pressure of inflation, high level of debt, and unfortunately increased restrictions, export restrictions that affect hundreds of millions of people. So when we say it is a solvable problem, then each and every one of us must clearly state what is it that I will do, my institution will do to solve this problem. And let me start by recognizing that we have come together as international community, more specifically 5 international organizations, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, FAO, the World Food Programme, and the IMF. We came collectively and we stated 4 objectives where we together can do better than each and every one of us on its own. First, to provide immediate, targeted, national and international humanitarian support to vulnerable people. The World Food Programme is short $8 billion to carry out its program. This gap must be closed. Second, we want to promote the deployment of all our capacity against trade restrictions, raise our collective voice that it is not only immoral, but it is harmful for the world economy when food doesn't get to where it must because of these restrictions. And I want to express my respect for Dr. Ngozi, but we all line behind her for that objective. We want to see the international supply of food increased also by completing what is ongoing negotiation to get the grains out of Ukraine to where it is needed. Africa included, Amadou, or Africa maybe on first place. And then to get our third objective is to support food production, storage and distribution. The World Bank clearly has a major role to play in that regard. But so do we at the IMF. We now have the new Resilience and Sustainability Trust. We intend from October on to deploy it to support countries in their policies, both to target safety nets in the most vulnerable people, but also to invest in climate resilient, sustainable agriculture. And last but not least, to recognize together that the current crisis that we face actually was already there before the war. Why? Because of climate shocks that have reduced dramatically production in many places, in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel, in parts of India, just to mention a few. So what we know is that if we are to succeed, we would only succeed together. And I want to say from the side of the IMF, we would play our role, providing balance of payment support, addressing the issue of debt, and also providing financing through augmentation of our programs, new programs, emergency financing, whatever makes sense, so we live in a world free of hunger. 1 second left. I'm saying that to Sri Mulyani because she gave me a hard time today. I was longer. This time, no, Sri Mulyani, I fit in my time.
Thank you, Excellencies, for your thorough and prompt remarks. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now I'd like to invite His Excellency Marco Aurelio dos Santos Rocha to deliver the knowledge and experience from Brazil in addressing growing food insecurity. The time is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks, Sri Mulyani and Saudi Arabia for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. At the risk of repeating somewhat what has been said here today already, as many members articulated this morning, COVID and the war and its ramifications produced significant supply chains disruptions. In this context, I would like to make 3 comments about hunger, as Ms. Georgieva just mentioned, that is scaling up. First, major focus now is Africa, where millions are at risk of food insecurity. The problem, however, is aggravated as other regions are struggling with poverty. For instance, World Bank research indicates that around 25% of Latin American and Caribbean countries live in conditions of poverty. Second, on top of food insecurity, we should add an energy crisis. Energy and food account for a large share of most vulnerable consumption basket. In the short term, energy and food prices increases raise poverty and inequality, but in the medium to long term, uncertain access to energy and nutrients affect health, education, and consequently the productivity of the economies. Third, solutions to reduce insufficient food supply must be twofold. On the one hand, We must deal with the immediate causes associated with the pandemic, inflation, and the effects of the war. But in parallel, we must promote structural solutions that tackle production and distribution issues, as well as making fertilizing and other inputs available and affordable. So the situation needs to be addressed with pragmatism, and for that, Brazil welcomes Indonesia and Saudi Arabia's initiative and expect that finance and agricultural experts, together with IOs, devise plans to tackle food insecurity based on evidence and data. The IMF and World Bank note that was shared today brings an initial diagnostic that we suggest to be further refined, mapping countries and regions most at risk of food insecurity to gauge demand, and also identify production chains better positioned to deliver and channels that need to be reopened to secure the supply of food. So importantly, we should resist designing non-optimal structure, especially when there are non-efficient allocations. During challenges times, there is always pressure to establish production plants that ignore comparative advantages and hardly survive without economically inefficient subsidies. Brazil is certainly part of the solution in the quest for food security. Brazil is an agricultural powerhouse, feeding 800 million people, around 10% of the world's population. Brazil was the fourth world's largest producer of grain, trading with almost 200 different jurisdictions. Brazil is responsible for 50% of the world's supply of soy. We are also top exporters of corn and beef. And again, we trade with almost all countries around the globe. So additionally, and finally, Brazil shows the highest rates of production and agricultural productivity growth in the last 30 years. So we are producing more food using less land on the margin, which helps preserve larger areas of natural vegetation. So good for the economy and good for the environment. So we're ready to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies, for sharing with us the food security programs in Brazil. So, ladies and gentlemen, next I would like to invite His Excellency Axel von Trotzenberg to share your views. We know that financial sector can play an important role in tackling food insecurity, so please share your views on that.
Well, thank you very much. Let me thank Indonesia and Saudi Arabia to put food security squarely on the agenda of this conference. I think it's very important, but at the same time, I think we need to reflect, and then building up a little bit what Kristalina just said. This is about hunger, and it is, in the end, man-made. Let's keep on reflecting on that. In 1974, there was a huge conference to eradicate, within 10 years, hunger. We never achieved this, and now with the SDGs, we are a lot less ambitious. We want to have it. So I think there is a principal longer-term issue, is have we lost the ambition? Have we lost the ambition to eradicate what you were just saying, hunger forever? And so food insecurity is with us right now. What has now been exacerbated is the war in Ukraine, which makes it even more prominent. So today we discussed a lot about the short-term measures, about trade measures, about social protection, about coordination, about the World Food Programme not having enough funding to provide for that. And this is all necessary. But we need to do a dual test. We need the short-term focus on all these issues and the longer-term focus to ultimately eradicate hunger. And that means longer-term agricultural policies, social policies, trade policies. And starting with the trade policies, we see this incredible increase in restrictive measures right now building up. But we need also to reflect, are there not long-term agricultural policy trade measures that prevent countries, particularly developing countries, to fully develop their agriculture and being also less subject to, let's face it, a lot of agriculture policies of OECD countries that are harmful for the development. And we should be self-critical about this. Secondly, we need also to look at social protection measures that is not only Band-Aid, but it has to be also longer term and build that better in. And here we will need to see that hunger is not only a problem of the poorest countries, it is unfortunately also a problem in middle income countries, and there often it is associated that there is an absence of nutritional policies in place. So that will need to be changed. And I think then we need to look at agricultural policies, how these agricultural policies can be stimulated and be coordinated. What we have been trying to do, and I think we don't do enough, for example, in Africa, to look how we can foster regional integration, if one thinks of the Sahel zone of the Horn of Africa, where we can do vastly better and provide better opportunities for farmers there to earn a living, but also sustainable. So what is, I think, the test, and I think the G20 would be very well served, that we not only focus on the short term, but also on the longer term, and challenge ourselves much more to make significant and permanent progress. Because the fact is, there was the 1970 conference, there was in 1996 a conference, 2002. It keeps on repeating, and we are failing ourselves. We need to act on this. I think what Kristalina said, every organization has to step up. For us, this is a longer term, this is investments. We mentioned that we can make $30 billion available. That sounds good, but it is inadequate if you look at the overall thing. So we will need to coordinate with each other and to make certainly in the short term ensure that actually, particularly for the most vulnerable, we have plans in place. But I also would emphasize we need to start looking and combining that with the longer term programs. We have started that also in our programs when we presented to the board that is not only the short-term intervention, but the longer term intervention will matter, because that is ultimately where, against which we will be measured, whether we'll be successful in reducing and ultimately eliminating hunger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your point of views. It is interesting that you also point out the agricultural sector role in securing food, because now I would like to hand over the time to our next speaker, His Excellency Dominic Ziller from International Fund for Agricultural Development, who joined us virtually. Your Excellency, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and let me also express my gratitude to the Indonesian G20 presidency for hosting this event and giving us an opportunity to talk about the potential of global cooperation in the light of the food crisis that we are just going through. Most important, and many of you have talked about that, the war in Ukraine needs to end immediately. Establishing peace would be the simplest way bolster global value chains and to fight poverty and hunger. But we also know that the compound effects of climate change, conflict and crisis have been weakening the food systems even before the war started, and it will continue to impact, Axel just mentioned, the most vulnerable. And this is of big concern, and we desperately need to find ways out of lurching from one food emergency to the next. We should instead develop a food system that meets the needs of a healthy population on a healthy planet. And we need to do that across the board. It will cost quite some resources. We have heard very interesting figures today, what needs to be done, how much money will be needed, and also about dreadful development around SDG 2 that we have been facing even before COVID and this war took place, and which has now been exacerbated. Obviously, we need humanitarian emergency aid, but it's not sufficient to prepare for further crises and shocks. In this regard, you can also consider the current crisis as a wake-up call. We should use the momentum that this gives to the global food systems wisely and try to scale up investment in food systems and food systems that should be not just sustainable but also resilient. It should be inclusive, should be fair. We need to pay special attention to the smallholder farmers. Those are the ones that are at the highest risk of poverty and hunger, and yet they're critical for feeding all of us. 30% of the global food supplies comes from the smallholders. And IFAD has been working with these small-scale producers now for more than 40 years. In the light of the pandemic and the global effects of the war, we have set up crisis response initiatives so that the progress made in past decades is neither lost nor reversed. Where support is needed the most, we need to invest to secure harvests. We need to lay the foundation for more resilient production, processing, and consumption. But these global challenges, they need global solutions. Coordinated global food security response will be essential. Therefore, IFAD is also supporting a number of activities, global initiatives, including G7's Global Alliance for Food Security, where we are leading in the action track, and also the FARM, the Food and Agriculture Resilience Mission, that was created by the French presidency of the European Union. And such international initiatives are excellent platforms for cooperation, for collaboration. But what is most needed is tangible actions and additional resources. And IFAD looks to G20 members, to G20 leaders, commit to investing in food systems. For tangible actions, IFAD stands ready to set up projects that lead to improve production and processing, to increase consumption of safe and high-level local products, to strengthen and more integrated domestic and regional markets. That's also very important, and to reduce production losses and waste, also in the transport and the supply chains. We call upon G20 members to make additional resources available. Keeping up and increasing development assistance, official development assistance, is key in this crisis. And I know that some countries have budgetary constraints for their development cooperation budgets, but this is not the point in time. This whole thing includes rethinking public support and incentives. The current policies and subsidies often fall short of reducing hunger or improving food security and nutrition. Beyond that, G20 should support making alternative sources of finance. We have heard a lot today about private sector. Private sector is crucial, but we could also leverage the special drawing rights to finance the need of agricultural transformation. G20 countries should, as I said, first and foremost try to encourage private investment in food systems. Public investment is the best way to crowd private investors in, and developing and increasing the local production and local processing capacities is economically viable. It leads to long-term growth and resilience, so it's even something that is beneficial for any investor. It is our shared responsibility to ensure the macroeconomic stability of the least resilient countries in the world, and this is the only way to disrupt the downward spiral of shocks, trade restrictions, export bans, inflation, and fiscal instability. I think that the G20 can play a key role in fostering global collaboration and ensure coordination among initiatives with a long-term vision. And your countries can support tangible actions. They can provide additional resources. And the resilient and healthy food systems, in the end, are the most important foundation for inclusive and sustainable growth. So let's take this crisis as an opportunity to shape them and as an opportunity to progress on the food systems, like the summit last year decided to do. Many thanks, and back to the moderator.
Thank you, Your Excellencies, for giving your remarks to us. And thank you, of course, to all speakers for that interesting discussion. Unfortunately, our time is over. So before ending this session, I would like to conclude that all parties today agree that food insecurity should not be a problem in this modern world. It is need to be solved globally. So therefore, now is the right time to ensure food security is handled thoroughly through long-term collaborations. Moreover, with the existence of climate change, we need to solve it in a sustainable way. That is the only way forward to create a stronger recovery for a prosperous future. So finally, I'm Viola Daniel, would like to thank all speakers once again and all the audience for joining us today. So for ending this session, let's give us applause.
Thank you, all the honorable speakers and moderators. What a comprehensive discussion we had today after listening various perspectives from our honorable guests. Well, Excellencies, honorable speakers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to the closing agenda of this seminar. I would like to invite the Minister of Finance of India, Her Excellency Nirmala Sitharaman, to deliver closing remarks. Your Excellency, you may have the floor.
Good evening, and I thank Indonesia and Saudi Arabia for a very well thought out topic to be discussed in this forum and to be discussed in all its various angularities, because we could see, even as we were hearing our eminent speakers, food insecurity it may be, but it is actually hunger. We heard Kristalina say that, actually hits the nail on the head. The issue of food insecurity, whether it is immediately after the war or even before it. There were also comments, and I was very grateful for Axel von Trotzenberg from the World Bank for highlighting the fact that there could be, or this could be, the best time for a review by countries, particularly in the European Union, to look at how best the world can benefit from agriculture and by trade of agricultural products. So with that background given already, I think my job for giving the concluding remarks are fairly easier. But I would like to share also somewhat going through the pandemic and also immediately after that, India's experience in ensuring that no Indian remains hungry even during the severest of lockdown that we had brought in, by sheer using of technology, and that technology which was put in place not anticipating a pandemic, but a technology which enabled movement of people, but ensuring the social welfare methods would reach them, measures would reach them. For instance, I'm sure most of you all saw the migrant workers in India moving from one place where they were working to back to their villages during the pandemic, and there were no trains, no buses, and there were media coverage of the event. But what I want to underline here is, because we have brought in technology, and because a poorer family which may live in the village, but the male or the female adult of the house goes out to the cities to work, both the male or female adult who's working in the cities, leaving the family behind, will both get the advantage of deriving from the public distribution system which we have. How is that possible? Because if you're living in your village, you would go to the shop which is given the right or the license to give governments subsidized food grains for the poor. But what we did was to ensure that the identity card of the individual and his family's details are all linked with what we call as Aadhaar, which is an identity card, which also has a biometric link to the identity, and making sure that because he has that biometric identity and his family is listed in that list of beneficiaries, because we give per person 5 kgs of wheat or rice and also some pulses, and in some states additionally cooking oil is also given. So the first measure which I want to put before you as a good case study, where we ensured our poor, be wherever they may be in a large country like India, would get their share of the ration and not deny his family members who are living in the village. So he could draw his bit from the city in which he is, and the rest could be drawn by the family, because all this was digitized. The distributing shop was also digitized. So that is one measure where technology has come of great help, and we did not have even one incidence of people waiting for food to be supplied. So that is one of the measures which I want to highlight. The second, we have been also ensuring that food grain production is not just in the hands of large landholding, but also with very small, what you would have earlier called subsistence farmers. But not really subsistence any longer. They are able to produce and sell in the market, and for whatever little that they produce, they earn their living. So what we do in that case, and we've been doing this for decades now, is for these small farmers who really cannot on demand get the right price in the market, because the quantity they produce may not be big. At the same time, there are no aggregators who can conclude or aggregate all these small gatherings or small productions so that they can come to the market and demand a better price. So what we have done is to determine a price, the minimum support price that we give for these very small farmers, because if by the time they approach the market, the rates had come down, come well below, even below the cost of production, we give them a price which is determined by a committee which looks at what is the cost of production and will he have a little more in his hand to run his family. So this MSP, minimum support price, which we are giving to the farmers, is also a very attractive reason why farmers today understand that their produce will not be left to the vagaries of the market. Now, however, I would like to draw the attention here that we procure from these minimum support price given to the farmers. From those farmers, we also procure to make sure that our buffer stock is adequately filled, because India has a Right to Food Act based on which people should get their grains at a highly subsidized rate. Just to give an example, if wheat per kg is sold in the market at something like 33 rupees a kg, what we give him when he takes it from the authorized shop is 2 rupees per kg. Literally a 31 rupees subsidy per kg is given by Government of India so that poor don't suffer. But when you procure it, we also keep it in the buffer stock so that when the distribution happens to the poor, it is drawn from that. But we've also come to a situation where the procured grains are much more than what we would want for the public distribution system. And that is where recently, in the last meeting of the World Bank, I did raise this issue, and I'm grateful to the WTO. I am very grateful to the DG WTO who picked up on this little complaint I had and has delivered somewhat, if not as much as I wanted, somewhat in terms in the last ministerial conference of the WTO, has delivered somewhat, at least to protect the rights of our coastal area fishermen who don't go deep into the sea, but the fish that they get is so critical for their nutrition and also for the local markets which depend on nutrition via fish that they bring in. So there are ever so many such schemes through which we have ensured that the farmers in India, however difficult the environment may be, produce and their cost is met even if the market vagaries hit them negatively. And the one other issue that had for a very long time as a little peeve in the sense WTO's restriction that grains so procured cannot be brought to the market to export is a condition which exists from the Uruguay round days. We have repeatedly said that more than what we have for our small farmers who need the ration, who need the supply, there are small farmers who produce more. We are quite willing to trade that so that in today's context, the hunger, the food insecurity can be addressed. But there is a hesitation in the WTO. The one little success we've had is what was mentioned earlier by Ivela, that through the World Food Program, we are now able to give the amounts which they might want, but that's not the end of the story. Besides the World Food Program, there are others who would want as well for selling in countries which so desperately need it. I think, therefore, I'm very much in line with what Alex from the World Bank said, that there is a time now for us to review so that we don't take exogenous shocks on issues like hunger, on food. I can understand if there's a problem with fuel, I keep worrying about it, but we can, that is an issue afterwards. First is get the food onto the poor. And therefore, I would think this conversation which is happening here is absolutely necessary. There is one reminder which I would like to place before all of you all. The UN has announced next year as the year of the millets. Millets are the wonder grain of the world. They are ancient. They are spread across all over the parts of the globe. If Chile and Peru can give us quinoa, there are many other countries, inclusive of some of the African countries and some parts of India, which have somewhat degraded land, which are not fertile. But such lands can produce good coarse grains. Millets have so many different varieties, and India leads in that production. I would like to submit before you that World Food Program or the world looking at food insecurity should not focus its attention just on wheat and rice and should not focus its attention just on a few pulses. It should look at coarse grains because that was part of all our lives till some time ago. Then we moved over to finer and finer grains, which are now giving us lifestyle diseases as well because of too much of gluten, whereas the millets don't have too much of gluten. So, Year of Millets is some time when all of us will have to work together. We can actually build awareness of both the supply, which is in abundance, and the demand, which lies in various different parts of the world, but we can effectively bridge the gap and be able to serve on bringing food security and not worry about shocks which give us food insecurity. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think time well worth spent by all of us, but more work to do in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Her Excellency. Excellencies, honorable speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Now we are proceed to next closing remarks. I would like to invite the Minister of Finance of Italy, His Excellency Daniel Franco, to deliver closing remarks. Your Excellency, you may have the stage.
Thank you very much. To sum up today's seminar is not an easy task, especially after the very interesting closing remarks by Nirmala. Let me start by thanking our Indonesian and Saudi colleagues for this very timely initiative. Food security is back to the core of the international policy debate, and evidently this calls for G20 action. As Mohammed said earlier, the G20 cannot be silent. I mean, we have to be there, we have to take action. The figures that were quoted are quite stark. According to the latest UN report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, in 2021 there were about 150 more million people affected by hunger than in 2019 before the COVID crisis. And food insecurity, which is a broader concept than hunger, is even more widespread. And this number is being increased by Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, and the war is actually denting on the supply of cereals. As a result of the war, the FAO Food Price Index reached an all-time high, and the price of fertilizers in parallel also increased dramatically. And this is creating also a problem of affordability, which adds up with the problem of availability. If we look to the near future and the next planting season, food availability is increasingly at risk because on one side the Ukrainian production capacity is being further undercut, and on the other side worldwide the higher price of fertilizers is affecting the quantity of production in the future. So in the short term, obviously, it is of the utmost importance that production and export by Ukraine are fully restarted, and hopefully that the war comes to an end. Expensive and scarce food and fertilizers are evidently a terrible threat to the well-being of individuals in very many countries, but they are also a threat to social and macroeconomic stability, and this is aggravated by the reduced fiscal space available for many countries. Against this background, in the absence of a resolute response, prospects are dire for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030 for a world free of hunger. We still have a long way to go. Drawing on today's seminar, it is evident that there is awareness of the urgency of the matter. There are a number of initiatives. Let me just quote three important initiatives. The Global Crisis Response Group established by the UN Secretary General, the Global Alliance for Food Security promoted by G7, and the Food and Agriculture Resilience Mission announced by the EU. In addition, another actor is the Global Agricultural and Food Security Program that was established by the G20 after the great financial crisis. Here it is important that all these initiatives are coordinated, and I believe that the G20 can play a role in fostering coordination. Challenges are both for the near term, in terms of emergency provision of food and humanitarian assistance, and the longer term. Here the issue is that of enhancing resilience and productivity of food systems. Much can be done at the national level. Much can be done by markets. But it is not enough. And I think that both before Sri and Mohammed pointed to drew a parallel to the COVID crisis, where much could be done at a national level, but there was and there is a need for international cooperation. First of all, there is the trade issue. We need a free and fair trade in the agri-food sector. The IMF Trade Policy Tracker identified about 20 countries imposing trade restriction in food and agriculture inputs. And these obstacles are creating an issue of availability in some countries. Then there is the issue of affordability. Here, a precise estimate of funding gaps are still lacking. The FAO estimates that funding the food import bill of about 60 less developed countries would cost about $25 billion. So the amount of money required is huge. The G7 gaps secure initial pledges for $14 billion. I believe the top priority here is to cover the financing needs of the World Food Programme for humanitarian purposes, and this takes the form of grants. In parallel, it is urgent to fund the food import bill of weaker countries and to develop sustainable agriculture practices and markets. Where funded by loans, this should be done at concessional terms. In this respect, both the IMF and MDBs, including IFAD, have an important role to play in supporting balance of payment disequilibria and development needs. Financing by IFIs should be directed at strengthening the agri-food sector of client countries. And here we move to the medium and long-term, more structural solution, which must go in parallel with short-term humanitarian efforts. On this account, specialized agencies like FAO and IFAD can clearly contribute to design programs that are instrumental to enhance the productivity and resilience of the food system. As I said here, the G20 has an important role in the coordination process. G20 must also play a positive role in fostering the political momentum. This is very much important for all our countries. The first building block, I believe, was already laid out in June last year by the G20 Foreign Affairs and Development meetings in the Matera Declaration, which includes many of the issues that we are discussing today. In concluding, I look forward to follow-up work, including through the suggested joint meeting of the Minister of Finance and the Ministers of Agriculture. It's interesting that last year we started meeting with the Minister of Health, and now we are going to meet with the Minister of Agriculture. But I believe this is very important. I mean, Minister of Finance cannot work in isolation, evidently. This applies to individual countries, but it applies also to the international dimensions. Time is of the essence, given the increase in food insecurity and the risk that the situation would get worse in the near future. We must make sure that actionable policies are quickly designed and funded based on a strategy coupling, as I said earlier, short-term assistance with a medium-term response to enhance food systems. I think it's quite interesting and telling that today all the 4 recent and future presidencies of the G20 are involved in today's seminar. So, thank you again to my Indonesian and Saudi colleagues for these initiatives.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, Honorable Speaker, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, now we have come to the end of our seminar. On behalf of Indonesia 20 Presidency on Finance track, we would like to convey our gratitude to all of you. We hope that you all have the most wonderful time in Bali. I am Dania Lukitasari. See you again another time. Stay safe, healthy, and happy. Selamat sore, Om Shanti Shanti Om. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.